In this tutorial, we're going to look at 3D objects in Photoshop. So what I'm going to do first, right off the bat, I'm going to open up a new document. So I'm going to File, New, and I'm going to make a new canvas, or Command N. And what I need to do here is I could change I could keep it any size I want, which is fine. But here is what matters, RGB. In CMYK, I do not believe 3D will work. So I'm just actually going to click on CMYK just to try it out, say OK, create. And if I go to 3D right now, nothing really shows up. If I convert to RGB, now I have access a little bit more to the things I want to do. So RGB mode is what will work for 3D objects. Okay, so the first thing I want to look at here also is the 3D panel. So there's a few things I could do here that are similar to going to my 3D drop down and doing this here. So I'm going to make a new layer because I want my 3D object to be on this new layer. I'm going to click on, let's say, selected layer, and I can make a mesh from preset. I could pick any one of these existing kind of default shapes. What I'm going to do, I'm going to do it over here as well. So I can click on that, press create, or I can go to 3D, new mesh from layer, mesh preset, and it's the same one. I'm just going to click on cone, and here I am. Now watch what happens. My workspace changes. It changes to a 3D workspace. There's some similarities. Obviously, I kept my layers and my properties, but now I have a 3D layer. I have a channels, and all these ones opened up. Now I'm not going to use them. I'm not going to go through that, but there are these certain ones that you can use while you're in 3D mode. However, I'm just going to keep it simple. But what I want to focus on right here is a 3D panel. I have an environment, a scene, a current view, a cone, which is my object, and a light source. What I want to go through just simply is what some of these can do. But watch what happens when I click on my environment. I have my properties panel changes. I'm able to change up a few different things here, shadow intensities and colors and things like this. I'm not going to go through that too much because you're just setting up the current environment you already have, but I like the default setting. It's quick, it's easy, it's simple, nothing wrong with that. If you're getting very meticulous and detailed into this, by all means, go into this a little bit further, but I'm just kind of play it simple here. The next thing I'm going to go through is scene. Now the scene is very similar to that too. I can change up how this object is actually played upon with, let me say, a shaded illustration, and how we can play around with, actually that one doesn't look as good, shaded, just to get you an idea of what you can potentially do just to get yourself started. But I'm just going to go default. And you can play around with the surface, keep it solid, play around flat, constant, normals, a bunch of different things we could do here. Same with lines and points, but I'm not going to get into that right now. Again, this is a little bit more detailed, not as necessary, but it is still good stuff to know either way. One of the more important ones I want to look at is the current view. Current view, object, and light. So the current view, what that allows me to do is set up my camera. So what I can do, I have in my control panel these 5 objects. I can rotate, I can roll, I can, I believe, drag or pan, I could zoom, and I can dolly, and I could zoom in and move around my camera as well. So let's play around with those initially. So with this, I'm not moving the object, I'm moving the camera. Now in these modes as well, the environment and the scene and the current view, I can change the camera view. I can also look at this little floating area down here. Oh, I clicked and I dragged, and I shouldn't have done that because now I don't know where my object is. That's okay, because that's going to happen. So what I could do with my little floating area here is right click on it, and look what happens. A bunch of default settings come up. I'm going to click on default, and look what it does. It brings me back to my default area. There's my object. That's what I wanted. So there's a bunch of great things I could do here. Same here as a current view. If I go to my drop down, there's my same. Default, left, right, top, bottom. Let's look at a few of those. If I go to my left, it takes me to the left side of that. If I go to my bottom, it takes me to the bottom of my object. And I'm going to do the same thing here. It's the exact same thing. Right click, I'm going to go to the front of my object. And that's also kind of the default. But I'm just going to click on that in default. Let's look at how we can play around with the camera. So we can orbit the camera, move the camera around any way we want. But keep an eye on something. Understand something. See this white space here? That's my canvas. That's my 8.5 by 11 canvas I originally set up. If I move the camera, notice the object kind of leaves the space. So if I go back, watch how I can actually go back to my layer panel and see nothing. Even though the object is there, it's not in view of my 8.5 by 11. I'm going to go back here and watch what happens. I have that selected again. I'm just going to click and drag and bring it back into my canvas. And then when I go back into my background layer, look at that. That's where it is. That's how it's going to look. That's how it's going to show up. My camera angle, my object, it's all going to be there. Let's go back, click on the 3D object, and look what it did. The cone showed up on the 3D space. It has a 3D icon, and it has a bunch of little drop downs here as well. I'm going to look at that a little bit later. So I'm going to click on that 3D space. Click on here, back to my normal space. Click on here, 3D space. So I could play around with that. There I am. And once again, this is also a little quick access to get me to some of those camera angles, the dolly. I can go up and down, pan 3D. I could pan back and forth. A few different things I could do, but let me continue here. So I'm just going to orbit around. You have some really great control with that. I'm also now going to rotate or roll the camera. So I could roll the camera which way or another. And once again, I could always go back to default if I want to go back to default. And this time I'm going to, I believe, drag. Oh no, this is pan. I'm going to pan it around and see where I can take it. It's kind of like just dragging it around. Then this one is going to be your slide. I could slide it, which is actually going to bring it closer or further. This is kind of a little, once again, it can be very finicky. There we go. That's what I was trying to do. It's going to bring it closer or farther away from me. Very touchy. And then I'm also going to click on this camera, which is going to let me zoom in or zoom out, which is similar to slide, but I'm sure there's a reason why one is the other. Now that is just playing with the camera angle. So let me get into a little bit of a better space here with my camera angle. Maybe I rolled it too much. I need to bring it back. Either way, this is what it looks like. And once again, this is what it looks like in my plane, in my canvas. But now let me go on here, click on the 3D, and now I'm going to click on the actual object. Look what shows up with my object. I have a X, Y, and Z axis. So there's my Y, there's my X, and there's my Z. Oh, sorry. There's my Z, and there's my X, and this is how it works. So now what I can do, these tools now allow me to play with the actual object, not the camera, once I'm on the cone or the object. So what I can do with my rotate, I can move the object. Notice how the camera's not moving, the object is moving, all right? Move it around, do whatever I want. And same with here, I have my roll. I can roll it back and forth like this. All these different ways to move my object. Here, I can drag, move it along, move it anywhere I want, up below the horizon line, above the horizon line, as if it's floating in the air. Here, I can slide it. So what I can do is sliding, bring it closer to me, or bring it further away. And here's a scale, but I'm going to show you a few different things we could do here. With our red, yellow, and, or sorry, red, let me try to get a better position here, current view. I'm going to just orbit around. Orbit. Move it around, and I'm trying to get back to that cone. There, now I have a better axis. Watch what happens when I click on these particular ones here. If I click on the arrows, the arrowheads, I can move it. So I'm going to click on an arrowhead. I'm going to move it. I can move it on the y-axis, up and down. I can move it on the x-axis, side to side. I can move it on the z-axis, further, closer. Okay? Now, if I zoom in again, let's look at this second piece. It's the rotate one on each of them. I could hover over, and now I can rotate it. I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to rotate it. The exact same as doing it here, but I have control here. Rotate it on the X, Y, and the Z. Oh, something happened there. That's not what I wanted to do. The rotate. There we go. So I could rotate it like that. Now the last one, well, actually there's two more. The last one I could do is this other little block here. So I did the move, I did the rotate, now the block. What I could do, I could scale it. Look how it scales. Let me zoom out. I could scale it and make it longer. I could scale it on the x-axis, make it a little bit wider. I could scale it on the z-axis if I hover over that block. Now watch what happens when I hover over the large yellow cube where they all come together. I could scale them uniform. You can see the little the little tooltip that helps you. I could scale everything uniform. All together on all axes. And that's it. And that's how we play around with at least moving the camera and moving the object. That's kind of it. Now I am going to go into the materials. We could play around with different materials. Look what happens. So on my object, I actually have a drop down and it says cone material and bottom material. So the cone actually is just two shapes. It's got my cone and obviously the bottom of my cone as well. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to click on the cone material. I'm just going to play around a little bit. My base color, let's just make it red, just for now, just so I can see it. Now here, on my properties panel, while my cone material is selected, I can select a bunch of default textures. Look at these interesting textures we have. I can click on those. Now the thing about these textures is as they show up, they're not the real textures. They're just quick renderings of a texture. Now you won't be able to tell, but this is a kind of a brass looking metallic, but once it renders, you'll have a better understanding, but I'm not going to render anything on this video because this just takes a long time. Now what I could do, I could play around with the glow and the metallic and the roughness and all these different things, the opacity, if it's see-through, a lot of different things I could play around with, but I'm just going to keep it simple. Bottom material, how do I want to change the bottom material? So you have access to a lot of different things that we can change, the colors and the textures and lots of different things with the materials and how these actual faces are going to look. So let's pretend I'm fine with this. The last thing I'm going to do, I'm happy with the object. I'm just going to change up my current view. I'm going to orbit and I'm just going to bring it up and I'm just going to say this is the way I want it to look on my canvas. So what I could do is I could actually click on my layer, my background layer, see this is what it's going to look like. This is exactly what it'll look like. For whatever reason, if this is why I wanted to see it, that's fine. I'm just going to say, okay, there it is. Now it doesn't go back to my normal workspace, my current workspace, my properties, my layers, and I had character and paragraph and all that stuff, and that's okay for now. Well, what I can do to release this is I can click on it and convert to smart object. Once I convert it to smart object, I can no longer edit it in 3D. Convert to smart object, look what happens. That's it. It's now just a normal object. It is a smart object. I can double click on it and that could take me back to 3D. I could play around with it just like we know with smart objects. Once you double click on it, it takes you back and look what it opened up, layer1.psb. And remember, what happens with the smart object? I can change up the, go to my 3D, go to my cone, maybe I'll pick this and I will move it over here. Maybe it's coming out of the, just to show you it's coming out. There it is. And I'm going to go back to layers. Fine. And I'm just going to save it, Command S and close. And look what happens now in my actual document. So I could always play around with it even though it's a smart object. And even though I release it, now what happens when I move it? It gets cut off. So that's okay. That's the idea behind the smart object in the 3D layer. Now I'm just going to do one more thing here. I'm just going to play with some type. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to press some type. And I'm just going to type in the word hello. All right. Maybe change the color of that to a black. And there we go. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Command T. And there it is. Okay, so I'm just going to play with some type in 3D. So, but now instead of going to 3D and new mesh from layer, I'm just going to say new 3D extrusion from selected layer. Okay, so I'll click on that. And now it brings me into the 3D panel. And now I can play around with hello, the word, and I can play around with the lights as well. So I'm going to show you the lights. The last thing I do is I'm going to show you the lights. So what I can do is the extrusion depth. Notice if I go to current view, I'm going to click my orbit and I'm going to look at the extrusion depth. That's a lot going on there. So I'm just going to bring down the, click on the object, bring down the extrusion depth and look what happens. It comes down a little bit. Now it can go the other way as well. So let me just fine tune it. I have the extrusion going the other way. Oh, I just think my computer is not loving what's going on here too much, and that's okay. I can play around with that layer, not a problem. I can play around with a few different things here. I can play around with a different color, because I think that extrusion depth is going to give me a little bit of an issue, but that's okay. I'm going to play around with the my hello front inflation material. So now it did get inflated. Let me go back here and try to fix this one more time. Let's go to just 100. There we go. That's better. It wasn't liking the slider there. That's okay. So I'm just going to go with the inflation. Let's see what I can do. I'm going to, my base color, I'm going to make it red. So that is the front part. The bevel, there's a little bevel on there. I could change the color there. The extrusion material, let's see what the extrusion is, which is that depth part. I'm going to change it to a random color just so I can see it. Okay, that's my color there. Say okay. And this is kind of all I really wanted to talk about and how we can do that. Now, The default camera is there, but look at this infinite light. I click on the last piece is the light. Now the light shows me, I'm going to bring this in a little bit. The light shows me it's right here. This is the light. That's where it's focused on. And what I can do with that is I can move the light around. Move it around, and get a better sense of how the light is reacting to my object, how the shadow's looking, where the highlights are, and look what I can do. If I click on that light source, I can right click and I can find a few different options here. Three different types of lights. You could have a point. Now it's going to turn into a pointed light. Or I could click it and change it to a spotlight. Or I can click it to a infinite light, and that was currently what I had. But I could change the color of the light. I could do a bunch of different things if I wanted to. If I wanted to give it a little bit more of a warmer glow, I can do that. A lot of different things you could do here, and the intensity of the light, how strong it is, the shadow. So that is how we could do that. Now, if I want to add another light, I could add another light. Just click on a new light, add new light. What kind of light do you want to add? And make a new light. So there's quite a bit you could do with also your light sources. So we have our environment, which you could change up. You have your scene, which you could change up. You have your current view, which helps you change the camera angle. You have the actual object you have, and you can move the object around when it's selected. We can use these tools to move it around, or obviously go in here and do it manually. And also you have some settings up here that would let you do coordinates, where you could also do it manually as well, or even more specifically, which is great. And then you have your light source, so you can play around with your light source as well. Now once I'm done, which I am, I'm going to go back to my layers. I can click on my layer panel, and I'll just say, okay, I'm happy with the way that looks, and I don't want it to be 3D object right now anymore. I'm just going to right click and say convert to smart object. It's still able to be edited in 3D once I double click on that smart object, but right now I can just move it around anywhere I want, do anything I want with it as a normal pixel layer, and I'm good to go. And that is 3D objects in Photoshop. But what I have to do now is to get back to my workspace. I would just go to Window, Workspace, and choose my workspace that I normally have. And there I'm back to my workspace. And I still have my 3D objects. I just don't have the 3D layer anymore. 3D layer there because that's in a 3D workspace. But I do have my normal layer panel and all my normal things again. And I do still have this 3D panel. And that is 3D objects, a very useful tool in Photoshop.